Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Person You Want to Be. I am your host, Eric Teplitz. Today, I am joined by a fascinating woman with a fascinating story, Nicole Angelique Kerr. Nicole Angelique Kerr is an award-winning health and wellness expert who has worked in a wide range of sectors, including government, nonprofit, military, academia, healthcare institutions, corporations, and in private consultation. Throughout her 30-year career, she has focused on supporting thousands of people from every walk of life to make realistic, meaningful choices for lifelong health and well-being. A graduate of the University of Minnesota's School of Public Health, Nicole holds an MPH in nutrition, as well as a bachelor's degree in public relations and business from Southern Methodist University, and a dietetics degree from Louisiana State University. She is a registered dietitian and the co-author, along with Dave Chong, Ph.D., of Eating the Rainbow: Lifelong Nutritional Wellness Without Lies, Hype, or Calculus. As a 19-year-old cadet at the U.S. Air Force Academy, Nicole survived a horrific car crash that changed the course of her life in profound ways. She has recently published a memoir entitled, "You Are Deathless: A Near-Death Experience Taught Me How to Fully Live and Not Fear Death." Nicole Angelique Kerr, welcome to The Person You Want to Be.
Thank you so much, Eric. I am just delighted to be here. I thank you for the opportunity to share my story on your platform, and I truly hope it will help people. That is my intention, that it will be effective in helping you deal with fears around death and other things. It's more than just that.
Fears of death, fears of life.
Yes.
Okay, so it makes sense that we would seek parental approval as youngsters, right? Because our survival is literally dependent upon our parents or caretakers. What's really interesting to me, though, is how deeply this desire can embed itself into our psyches, well past the point of literal survival dependence and far into our adulthood. And this is something that you write about pretty explicitly in your book. So to start things off, could you paint a portrait for us of your childhood environment, where you grew up, and give us a sense of what maybe it felt like? What were the conditions of your childhood?
Sure. Have you ever seen the movie The Great Santini?
I have not. I've heard of it, but I have not seen it.
Okay. So for those of you who have seen it, it's kind of like that. So what I would say is I had a father who was military. He was a 1960 graduate from the Air Force Academy, and he wanted one of his 4 kids to follow in his footsteps. And he cross-commissioned in the Marine Corps, so very rigid and rules, lots of rules growing up. I grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, which is part of the Southern culture of Bible Belt. We went to church a lot. My mother was Lutheran and my dad was Southern Baptist. So we got a helping heaping of both of those religions every week. And then on Wednesdays, the Baptist. And then of course there's revivals during the summer where you pack a pew, so the church was a huge foundation of our growing up years and the messages that came from that. We were also in private schools for, I guess, till junior high. And then my mother put us in public schools, which was quite radical at that time because I was put in a school that was 98% African American. And before that, I was in schools that were all Caucasian kids. So that was a real shocker for me to go into that kind of situation and try to navigate that world. I went back to private school middle of my junior year because I just didn't feel I was getting the preparation I needed to move forward in my schooling. So we were above average. My dad owned a company called Yazoo, and we worked in the office growing up. That, we didn't take vacations unless they had a work objective. So it was always work before fun. I talk in the book about my dad's 10 commandments. There's God's 10 commandments, and of course, the one that got hammered in was honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. See, I still remember all this from Bible drill, because it was really drilled into my head, some of these scriptures. But that was a really, really important, I would say, lesson for us, is if we didn't follow his rules, we would get punished. And his punishment came with beatings with belts. That's his form. And, and looking back, we didn't act out that bad, but it was just, we didn't do what he said. Like his first commandment is, you're not going to spend the night with anybody. And I'm just like, oh my gosh,
no sleepovers as kids, in other words.
Yeah. And his rationale was nothing good comes out of it. That was his rationale for a lot of things. Dating, I never went on a date. Nothing good comes out of it. So I go from non-dating to going to the U.S. Air Force Academy, where there's 3,700 men and maybe 300 women, 10% of their class is women, and then he tells me not to date any of them, and I'm just like, really?
So let's back up a little bit. You mentioned, you actually in the book list out your father's 10 commandments, which is just, fascinating. Were these posted somewhere? How did he communicate these from on high down to you and your siblings?
Oh, it was sitting at the dinner table. We all knew, what was going to happen. So it was, these are his rules. You can't, like the air condition, you had to shut the doors. You can't leave anything open. It's wasting money, things like that. So he made it clear to all four of us children what the rules were. And we knew if we disobeyed him that we were going to be punished. And It really was, you get one chance, and that was it. And we didn't get, like I said, work before play. We had chores to do. We had to do them on Saturday. If they passed my mother's inspection, and she was Ukrainian German, so she had high standards, especially when it came to the house. You weren't going to go to the hotel and go swimming. That was our reward, and have pizza afterwards. If we didn't pass her inspection, we didn't go. And so it was just a real rigid, controlling environment. And I learned very early on to please my father. And, and then with the two churches, you kind of unconsciously put your father, you superimpose it on God the Father, right? So if I'm disappointing my father, then I'm disappointing God the Father. So, it's a double whammy.
And it sounds like in a sense, your dad took his cue from the religious presentation of God and assumed sort of the role of God in your household, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. And we were terrified of him. We really were, because, we knew he...
the fear of dad.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And then the fear of God, because we weren't doing the right thing. So we were going to go to hell. And, that as a little kid, that's really scary, because we take things literally as children. So that concept where you go down in the middle of the earth and burn up, I could never quite understand that, because I thought, well, are we going to eat barbecue every day down there? And, how do you take a shower down there? I was trying to put the current living situation we're in on earth down there, and it just wasn't computing in my little 6-year-old, 7-year-old brain. But you didn't dare ask, this doesn't make sense or anything. You just had to believe it. And you stay in a bubble with other people that are going to church, and you all believe the same thing. And the school situation is kind of the same thing too. So your little pod that you hang with all is believing in the same belief systems.
Right. And where were you in the chronology of birth order?
I was the second. So I have an older sister and then a younger brother. And then 6 years after that, we were pretty close in age, like boom, boom, boom. And then 6-year gap and then another brother. So my dad wanted me to be the boy. I weighed 10 and a half pounds when I was born. He was sure I was going to be a linebacker for the Dallas Cowboys. And guess what? I was a girl. And he couldn't believe it. He had the nurse go check twice, but there was an expectation of wanting a boy, the disappointment of that. And then, my brother did come along 18 months later. So I kind of got like lost between the firstborn and the boy and then another boy. And I think, for me, it was always trying to get my parents' attention, approval, love, which all kids want,
Sure.
And when you're in a crowd of that many, I figured out the way I could do that was to perform well and to get, what I want to say, do something that none of my siblings would do. So I decided I was going to go to the Air Force Academy. And they admitted women in 1976, in case people forgot about that. And then 1980 was the first class of female graduates from all of the service academies. And mine was the class of 86. So I was fairly new. Now, I was not prepared for the academy. Okay. In high school, I modeled. I was the National 17 magazine representative from Mississippi. My sports consisted of racquetball and softball. Okay. Now to go to the academy, most of the times you need to be a varsity athlete. Okay. And there's just such a rigorous protocol to get through to get into any of the service academies. You have to have a congressional nomination. You have to pass a physical. You have to do a physical fitness test. You have to do high on your academics. And I managed to pass all that. I don't know how, but my principal my senior year called me in and said, Nicole, the Congressman Dowdy's on the phone for you to tell you, congratulations, you're going to be one of the first women from Mississippi to go to the academy. And I just, I couldn't believe it. I really didn't think I was going to go. And then all of a sudden it really hit me. Oh gosh, I'm going and I can't get out of it. It's like the shame if you quit something after going through all that work, I couldn't do it. So
here you were putting yourself forth for something you didn't even really in your heart want to do.
That's right.
But you knew that it was sort of maybe the fastest route to your dad's approval. Or at least that's
and I really did buy into the image of the media with the military, of how special you are and wearing the uniform. And I would say the women's uniform still needs some help these days, but and just being of service to your country, and you would get to go places that most people don't get to do. And I bought into that seductive advertising of being all that you can be in the military. And I didn't think of it as me going to a place where the mission really is to learn to kill, to defend and fight for the United States. And in that you may be called upon to kill somebody, because that totally went against my soul. And I'm like, I fired the weapon for the first time at the shooting range and I hit the concrete post it was standing on. I just was like Private Benjamin. I was not cut out for this, and that
reference I got, Goldie Hawn.
And it was really hard because even in boot camp, I got a 3-minute phone call. This was before cell phones. Each of us, after 3 weeks of boot camp, got a 3-minute phone call. And I called home and all I had to do was hear my mother's voice. And I cried, Eric, for 3 minutes. I was hyperventilating. I could not get another word out. And then finally the officer said, Kerr, your time's up. You need to go sit over there and get yourself together. And my mother later told me, she looked at my dad and said, what have we done to her? And Dad said, she'll be fine. Now, my father knew it was going to be abusive. And I still to this day don't understand why he would have wanted me to go there, knowing the abuse that goes on, and especially admitting women the sexual abuse that goes on. So that I later realized was my first panic attack. I couldn't get my voice. I couldn't say what I needed them to say to me was, Nicole, you have permission to quit. If it's not working out for you and you're not, safe, or you don't enjoy it, or it's not what you want to do, you can come home. There's no shame in it. There's no anything. It was, you tried it and it just didn't work out for you. But I didn't get that. And so I toughed it out, had to go to our flight remedial, where it's one-on-one for the next 3 weeks. And I thought I was going to die. I really did. Every day they woke me up, and I had one-on-one with a different senior cadet. And I just was praying to just make it through basic training. And I somehow did, and then got into the school year, made it through that, and started the beginning of my sophomore year, even made it through survival training, SERI is what they call it. And, I was put with 2 guys, and as soon as they found out they had a girl in their little triad to do this whole exercise, they were just like, they went up and complained that she's going to keep us from achieving the objectives that we need to do. And it was just like, I was a loser, and I was just going to weigh them down. And that was not true. We all got through it together, but that was the attitude. If you had a woman on your team, you were a loser. And I admit, I fell back in runs and stuff. I was not a runner. I'm 5'11". I took ballet for years. I wasn't conditioned for what the physical part of it was. After a year there, I was in top shape, but it took a long time. And then the beginning of my sophomore year is when the car crash happened.
Okay, let's pause there, because this is a certainly pivotal event in your life story in a lot of ways. I wanted to ask you, normally I ask people for their earliest memories as a child of who it was they felt they were, or what it was they wanted to do, or who they wanted to be, because sometimes kids have a sense of this, and it's fascinating to uncover this. Sometimes, kids just have fantasies. They want to be, a ballerina. Not sometimes that's not just a fantasy, but in other words, like, we have all these ideas, and some of them come into our head from outside of what it would be cool to do or be, right? And it sounds like to some extent being in the military was that for you. Like, it sounds like there was ambivalence. Part of you, as you said, bought into the appeal of it. But it sounds like it was mostly, if I understand correctly, about, winning your dad over and winning his approval. Would you say that's right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
First and foremost. Yep.
So, and there's a point, and I took some notes here about from your book, and I don't know if I'm going to find the exact quote. Oh yeah, here it is. So you mentioned the car crash. We're going to get into that deeper, but obviously you had this car crash, and I'm sitting here speaking with you now. So you survived that car crash, but it put an end to your military career. And you wrote in the book, you say, "I'm more than relieved I won't be going back to the Air Force Academy, but where would I go? Never before had I considered what I wanted to do or be." So I want to ask you now, at this moment, if you think back, can you recall any inklings, however suppressed they might have been? Can you recall any sense during your childhood of, even a moment of being free to entertain that question?
There's only one, and it's ironic because I wanted to be a ballerina. and I had studied ballet since I was 10 years old, and I had progressed enough to be an apprentice in the Jackson Ballet Company. I went to a summer session and got a scholarship to the Joffrey Ballet, and my dad said, "No, you're not going. You are not going to be giving your life to ballet, that you'll never make any money doing it. And so you're going to quit." And so I happened to grow 3 more inches. So if you put me on point, I would have been over 6 feet tall and probably not had anybody to be paired with, but it was his rules. And he said, no, that's not the best for you. You're going to go to school. You're going to get a business degree. You need to be an entrepreneur like me. You don't need to work for the government. You don't need to do this. So he really put parameters around what he thought would be best for me. And father knows best. And we were really raised to believe that he does know what's best and we better listen to him. And so that was the end of my ballet career. And I look back on it now, and yes, I know there's a lot of eating disorders going on with that, but I developed one anyway after the wreck. But it's just a whole different way of living and a different career, and it's pretty much short-lived in terms of age. So he didn't want me to have to give up high school to go to classes, because that's in essence, when you get good enough, you have to trade off and do your homework, schooling at home.
So how old were you when you were offered this scholarship and he shut that down?
15.
15. And you said that you were raised to believe in, father knows best and all that. Do you have any recollection of how you felt about that? Like, did you resent your dad for, basically ending that possibility for you? Or did you feel, well, okay, he would know, he knows what's best for me? And do you remember how you felt about it?
I remember that, he framed it in a way of, you can't give up on your education. You're too tall now, all the negatives that were happening around it. So therefore, Nicole, you need to put your focus somewhere else. And so I transferred that to a teen board at a department store, and ran that team board, was on it for 2 years and ran it and modeled and did all these other things. So it was fun and I enjoyed it. And I got to do a lot of public speaking and charity events, but that wasn't a very good resume builder for the Air Force Academy.
But how did you feel about, basically being told, no, you can't pursue ballet any further? That's not an option. You went with it.
My dad tells me you can do this or not do that. One of the rules, you're not spending the night,
Right.
And I tried it in the 4th grade, and I never got to do it again until I was at the academy and spent the night at 18 years old with 3 other women, and he was serious about it. So, I just did what he said.
Got it. Okay. So you're in your sophomore year at the academy when the car crash happens. You go into this in detail in your book. So if you could just kind of summarize for us, what were the events leading up to the accident? Let's start there.
Okay. It was a Sunday, and earlier in the day, I'd met with the commandant of cadets because he wanted me to talk to new recruits from high school and potentially sway them to come to the academy, some females. And so I had done that while the rest of my squadron went to this kind of kickoff for the opening of the school year in August, get everybody together and roo, rah, rah, here we go. And so I got there late, and it was a softball game, and the Air Force supplied alcohol, beer to all the cadets there. And it was getting late, and you're not allowed to have a car there till you're a junior or you're senior. I was a sophomore. So I said to this guy, hey, can I get a ride back with you? He's like, sure. I didn't know him hardly at all.
Pause real quick. I just had to interrupt for a second to ask you, was not the legal drinking age 21?
I know it was at least 19. So I'm not sure, but they were breaking their own rules.
Okay. Yeah. That's what I just wanted to clarify, because you said they provided, the academy provided the beer?
Yeah, the Air Force did.
The Air Force provided the beer to the cadets, regardless of their age.
Yes, and the officers that were supervising the event left early, which they never are supposed to do. They're supposed to be the last to leave to make sure all the cadets are going to get home back to the academy safely.
Interesting.
So there were a lot of mistakes made. Let's just put that.
Okay. So sorry to interrupt. Continue.
That the Air Force was held responsible for. It broke its own rules, and after this situation, they never allowed that to happen again.
They were held responsible for your accident. Is that correct?
Well, anytime you're in the military, you give up the right to Tort Claims Act. You give up the right to sue the military if they screw up. So if you're a fighter pilot and your plane goes down and it's mechanical and you die, your wife cannot sue the Air Force. When you get inducted into this service, you give up that right. So even if they did it, I couldn't sue the Air Force.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So continue with the story. Yeah.
Okay. So he's a senior and he's like, I have never dated. So he's like, hey, Nicole, why don't we stop and get a beer? And I'm thinking, we got to be back by 7:35 or we're going to get in trouble because I was in trouble the year before and I don't want to march tours or do confinements or demerits anymore. So I said, as long as we get back by 7:35. And he's like, okay. So we stopped at this rinky dink bar and he had two beers and I had 2 beers. And that was first, I had not drank at the event. And so the bartender asked him if he was okay to drive and he said, sure. So we got in his 1965 Corvette convertible. And then he said he wanted to stop and look at the Rocky Mountains. Now, I am naive about what goes on. I really am. I hadn't been on a date. Okay. And so he has a whole different agenda and it doesn't dawn on me that that's what it is. So I'm like, we've got to get back. And I think we tried to kiss me and I'm like, no, we got to get back. Cause I was like getting hyper, like, uh-oh, where's this going? So he got back on the road. And the next thing I remember was waking up in the ICU. We never made it back to the Air Force Academy. And this, if your audience can see it, is what happened.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, for those listening to this, Nicole just showed a picture of what the car looked like post-accident, wreckage, and you included this in the book. And I wanted to say, I really appreciated it seemed like very carefully selected and curated photos to include throughout the book. And it's each one of them serves, I felt, a pretty important purpose and really helped to just bring home the reality of certainly that picture. I mean, just shows you you have to wonder how anyone could possibly have survived a wreck like that. I mean, it's just, the car is just so unbelievably destroyed. And but I also appreciated the other pictures that you included because it just helped provide a sense of intimacy and like familiarity. You've been reading about the story, and now here's a picture to show you the people involved and the people who took care of you, for instance, post accident. And it really, I think, made it that much more impactful to put faces to the names and whatnot. And in this case, like a picture of the scene. This was not a fender bender by any stretch.
No,
this was a
demolition.
This was a demolition for sure. Yeah. And your body blacked out any memory of the actual impact and accident. Right. But you find yourself in the ICU, and what is your condition? What is your state of mind? What is your awareness of what's happened to you?
I wake up and the first thing I think about is, don't tell my dad, he'll kill me.
Wow.
That's the first thing, because I broke his rules. I dated a cadet, I was drinking, and I had a cigarette. Okay. This was the first time that I had fun in my life. Let it go. This is the second year in college. I went through hell the first year. Okay. And it was like, I was just trying to go have fun. And man, I got slammed, and it was just like, and so my dad blamed me for breaking his rules. That's how he dealt with it, is you broke my rules and this is what happens. And he told that to my siblings. They later told me that Dad said, see, this is what happens to you when you don't listen to me. And of course, I disappointed God as well. So here I've got this blame and shame. And this is when the district attorney comes to interview me, probably 10 weeks after the accident. Okay. So I spent 7 weeks in ICU, 4 months in the hospital, pronounced dead at the scene. And the reason I know this is the paramedic, the EMT that I consider one of my earth angels responsible for saving me, came to my hospital 10 weeks after and told me what he saw there. He remembered everything and he filled me in on everything. And I actually put that description in the book. And so I credit him with being able, he pronounced me dead. Some bystanders had called it in, and it took about 10 to 15 minutes for the first volunteer fire department to get there. And so I was out that entire time.
10 minutes?
10 to 15 minutes.
10 to 15 minutes, clinically dead, right?
Yes. They put a blanket over me, and then John gets on the scene and he's like, nobody calls a death. I call it, you can't as a bystander say she's dead. So that's when he started working on me. And the only sign of life he got was after a sternal knuckle rub, my right pupil flickered and my eye flickered and pupil dilated. And what do they say about the eyes from a spiritual perspective?
The windows of the soul.
Right. So my soul came back in. Okay. And that's what he saw and got me going again. Now, of course, they did CPR all the way to the community hospital, blood pressure 60/0. I had a lot of injuries. I'm not going to go into them all now. They're all described, in the book. And needless to say, it was horrific. And I woke up with this sense of, where am I? What happened to me? And the only thing I remembered throughout all of that was bright white light. That was it. And my memory did not come back, Eric, until 19 years later. Yeah. And I was like, nothing ever came up. So I believed my parents because I had no other basis on, okay, well, I guess I partly deserved it because I broke your rules and he was drunk. Later, it turned out, he had gone to a separate hospital. He was not injured bad. He was back at the academy.
He being the driver. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, and it also, rank has its privilege. His dad happened to be a 3-star general in Washington at that time and made a call to the superintendent and said, I don't care what happens, my kid's going to graduate. He's a senior and he graduates. So the state of Colorado did charge him, but with vehicular assault and DUI, and he pleaded guilty and got a deferred sentence. So, it is that priority or the privilege, the higher up you go in the command.
Right. Now, one of the things that I appreciated about your book, and I appreciated quite a lot of things. Number one, you are very personally candid and revealing about lots of different aspects of your experience. So you become a very reliable narrator because you engender the trust of the reader, I think, in terms of the way that you present your story. And it's also a very satisfying read as a reader, in the sense that there are a lot of mysteries in your story. What I mean by that is there are a lot of questions that naturally come up for you as a reader, came up for me. What happened to the driver of the car? What happened to so-and-so? How come, what happened with here? Like what if, so there are all of these lingering questions. And I have to say, by the end of the book, I felt like you had answered all of them. And And that was very satisfying because some of them you don't, and also with a storyteller's flair, you withhold some of those answers until like very close to the end. But it's so satisfying to get them because you might, as a reader, you might have said, "Hey, yeah, I wondered what happened. I was wanting to know this," so that is really well done. I salute you on that. Also, it becomes very clear to anyone reading the book how much it must have taken for you to actually write this thing and publish it. So I'm going to just pose the question to you. How long did it take you to write this thing?
13 years. Okay. And I will tell you, because my memory didn't come back for 19 years, I just got on with life with that motto of no pain, no gain, and all that, and was just pushing myself, trying to achieve, trying to become independent, trying to act like nothing happened to me, like pushing it away and getting on, going back to school, getting, a great job with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta. And I went into public health and nutrition, and I just was pushing myself and pushing myself. I completely shut all my feelings down. Wow. And I was just operating from my head. And I developed an eating disorder the year after the accident. My parents took me to my sister's in Dallas to go back to school. I went to community college for a semester and thought, okay, my brain's working okay. And then I went to Southern Methodist, which was not a good choice for me now that I look at it, because it's so image focused. There's a lot of money there. It's a lot of how you look and about sororities and fraternities and that whole part of college. And I just didn't fit in it. And so I developed compulsive eating, which there wasn't even, just starting to come out as an issue, eating disorders. And so it took me almost 40 years to really undo the whole eating disorder.
Wow.
I was just in so much pain, and my parents, my mother in particular, had told the doctor when he said Nicole needs some mental health. She said, no, God and Jesus are our psychiatrist, and they will help Nicole. And she was just wrong about that. I needed mental health, and I didn't get diagnosed with PTSD until 2 years ago. I got labeled depressive. I got labeled anxiety. I got labeled all these other things, but nothing ever worked. And, and when the doctor went through the evaluation with the VA, they're like, how could they have missed this? And I said, I don't know, but a lot of that kind of stuff happens, but that's exactly what I've lived. My amygdala, those little almond shapes back here that are responsible for fight, flight, and freeze, they would override my neocortex, which makes all your executive decisions. And I had a head injury. I went unconscious for 12 hours. That is a moderate traumatic brain injury that qualifies for that. But they didn't know about that back then, So they were like, well, her skull's intact. Her brain seems to be intact. We're going to work on these other areas, So I just went on with life. And then I started I went into counseling myself. I put myself through therapy and started going to compulsive overeater 12-step programs, trying to find an answer to why I couldn't stop binge eating. And then I developed other issues as well. But when my memory came back, that was crucial.
Okay. Yeah. So, just to interrupt real quick and then have you proceed from that moment, because that was my next question. But I just want to acknowledge all of the various traumas that occurred. And it's so interesting to hear how these were not acknowledged, it sounds like, certainly not by your parents, although you somehow have it in you in the book. At a certain point, you develop what comes across as an authentic compassion for them, despite some really damaging and hurtful things that were said and done to you, that's very profound. It does not come across as like a spiritual bypass. It seems like you really eventually arrived at an understanding that they did the best they could as best as they could. And even though some of the things that were said to you, and as a reader, you just gasp when you mention, like, for instance, your dad saying, this is what happens when you break my rules. Like, whoa, like, and then
Yeah.
and then also, you talk about your mom was there for you in a profound way after the accident. You talk about she was pretty much like day and night in the hospital 7 days a week with you, and was with you for months when you were recovering. And really, like, her dedication to you comes across to me, the reader, as a bit of a counterbalance to your dad's kind of very cold response. And you go, well, at least she got this very loving attention from a very, very devoted mother. And you acknowledge her wholeheartedly for that.
Yes.
And then years later, she says something that was equally hurtful when you were in another crisis. And so I just want to, Nicole, acknowledge you for as someone who experienced very, very legitimate traumas of many different kinds. Obviously, the physical traumas from the accident were objectively true, even though some of those weren't acknowledged, it sounds like, till many years later
Yeah.
by the powers that be, right? But the emotional trauma, the psychic trauma, those sorts of things, and what you identify as spiritual trauma, which I'll have you talk about, these things were just as serious. And it's so interesting that people, may not relate to the specifics of your story, but inevitably, if you're around on this planet long enough, you're most likely going to experience some variety of trauma.
Exactly.
And it's interesting what we do with that. Like, we suppress it. Sometimes we blame ourselves for it. It's our fault. We don't acknowledge it. We refused. We deal with it by not dealing with it. And when that happens, inevitably, our body is going to respond and say, if not our soul is going to respond and say, hey, like, it'll eventually get your attention. If you're not dealing with trauma, it will get your attention somehow, right? So speaking of that, it's 19 years later. Tell us about how your memory came back of what happened during that, after the crash. Tell us, what were the circumstances, first of all, that precipitated the recollection?
People are like, oh, were you meditating or doing this or that? I said, no, I drove to Starbucks and got my usual, non-fat latte. And I was on the way to CDC. And all of a sudden, I could see myself sitting in the passenger seat of that Corvette, clear as day. And I always wondered how I cut up the insides of my leg and cut off my foot, and didn't really hurt my brain too much or my spinal cord, and because I severed my wrist and pelvis, everything around it. But, it was like a miracle that I didn't have major brain trauma or being paralyzed. And I just saw myself with one foot on the dashboard, the other one crossed over with your knee, crossing over to the other leg, and you put your foot on your other knee. And I went butt up through the windshield and cut all that up by doing that. And then, I was like, uh-oh, I have got to go to my chiropractor. I'm not going to work. So I went and saw Dr. West, and he didn't have any openings that day. I said, I don't care. I'm sitting here. I'm not moving. He's got to fit me in. I am just shaking here, and he eventually did. And he told me that there were repressed memories coming up. And I said, why now? And he said, because your body feels safe, the body holds the answers. The Body Keeps the Score is an excellent book on trauma, and it remembers. So I believe if you've been traumatized and it is for your highest and greatest good or someone else's highest and greatest good, that it will be revealed in your body when you feel safe enough. I had been doing transformational work, like seeing a therapist, seeing a chiropractor, doing all this stuff on my own for years. And I really believed it was then that my body was like, you're ready to handle the truth about your accident, and I want to just read a little part of my book when he was working on me. And I remembered what happened. I am spinning around insanely fast, like those tilt-a-whirl carnival rides. Grabbing the side of the car door, I scream as my side of the car smashes head on into something. What is it? I realize I can't stop anything, and my voice fades. I fly out of my seat through the windshield. Around me, glass is shattering like splatter paint. I feel pieces of it cutting into my thighs and legs. God, this hurts. And then something slices my left foot. Bad. I try to shield my face with my hand, my mouth wide open under it. Then I'm in the air for what feels like forever. When I finally hit the ground, I understand that I am going to die. My mind freezes. I scream, "Oh my God, help me." Then I have one final thought. I'm not going to make it. And that was it. That was the end of my treatment with Dr. West. And then he told me to go home, go to sleep, and that we would, the rest of the memory would come again at some other point. And he was right. The rest of the memory came the next day about me actually crossing over to the other side. A spirit, I called it like Casper the ghost, but I now know it was my angel, my grandfather on my dad's side, James Kerr. And that only came to me 3 or 4 weeks ago. This has been after the book published. But I wrote in the book, it was a male. I knew it was male, and I knew, I just knew certain things, but I just never could put that together. And what is so interesting is I am 58 years old, and my grandfather died at age 58 years old from a heart attack. And that has something to do with it. I don't know exactly what, but there's a reason he let me know at this age when he passed that he was the one that came down and lifted me up and took me to this plane. And so my spirit soul left my body before I crashed down. So
all right, a few clarifying questions. Yeah. So if I can remember them all, because they were coming at me as I was listening to you. So first question, so the chiropractor says to you, you have this flashback, and the chiropractor says the rest of the memories will come. And this was not a function of any adjustments he made or treatments he gave you. This was just time and like you said,
I've been seeing him on an ongoing basis. Okay. So that may have been as a result of that. Right. But yeah, it was probably a combination of that and doing cognitive behavioral therapy and, just other modalities, massage, yoga to help my body. Okay. And before I forget, another semi-tangential question, but still something I wanted to ask. You grew up with this very, very strict religious upbringing, and as you describe your experience of the NDE, near-death experience, and you have an encounter and an experience that really kind of just challenges everything that you had been raised to believe, right? In terms of what God is all about, so one of the things I was wondering is when you mentioned that you went, for instance, to Overeaters Anonymous groups, and you did a lot. I mean, it sounds like you really did a lot of things to help yourself, and thank goodness someone advocated for you, and that was you. But I'm wondering, like, with that strict religious upbringing, when you did the 12-step group meetings, did you have any resistance to the idea of a higher power, the way it's presented in those meetings? Or the way that God is discussed, or higher power? How did you reconcile that with the God of your upbringing, and perhaps, yeah. Yeah, I can tell you that I was losing faith in the God of my upbringing probably at age 18 when I went into the academy, because I was praying for things to happen and for help to happen, and it never came through. There was no evidence that God was hearing me and doing anything about it. And I call it the vending machine concept of God, that you put in a certain behavior or a certain amount of money and you press the Coca-Cola button, well, out should come a Coke, well, what if Mountain Dew comes out and you didn't push Mountain Dew, or nothing comes out? It's like, it's back on you. You did something wrong. It's not the machine's fault. And what I realized is that God wasn't working for me. This kind of God where you ask, and he's loving and he's kind and he's supportive. But then on the other hand, he's judgmental and he's punitive. And I just couldn't, like, how could you let these people abuse me like this? How come I can't use my voice here? I have to, yes, sir, no, sir, no excuse, sir. I can't even offer an explanation, I have to just endure it. And I just couldn't start connecting that. So it really was starting to happen right when I was, had the accident, but I did know about angels. And I think that's why my grandfather chose to come in as an angel, because I knew there were the archangels. And I also knew there was Lucifer. I mean, good and bad angels, but I could recognize that and I could feel safe in that, being held in that form and taken up in that form.
So when you came time for the 12-step meetings and they, and you turned yourself over to a higher power, in your case, would you say that it was to the angels that you like, how did you interpret that in the context of the 12-step program?
That there's a whole spiritual dimension up there, and I'm just going to turn it over to all of that. That includes God in there somewhere, but I still personalized God. I still thought God was some kind of form or person or something like that. I didn't,
right.
I didn't see him as I do now.
Okay. And then one other follow-up question before we continue with the actual NDE. And that is, you said that only recently, weeks ago, it was your grandfather revealing himself to you as that presence that you encountered during your NDE. How did this awareness come to be? How was this expressed to you or communicated to you?
Okay, so I have sentient audio. I can hear things.
Clairaudient?
Yeah, clairaudient. And so I have, over the last several years, developed a relationship with my soul. And this is a great exercise for all of your audience to do. I got it from Lee Harris, who's an energy intuitive. But every day on a piece of paper, write down, what does my soul want to tell me today? Okay, because I never understood what my soul was. All I knew was soul music growing up, but I didn't have a concept of what my soul is, and so I have been dialoguing with my soul, and that has really helped me trust myself. And then I was given guidance that I have spirit guides. Now, we all get guardian angels when we come in, and a spirit guide, I believe. And so what I've now been exposed to is a greater community of guides that can help me with my questions. And so I check in with my body, and I'm still using muscle testing. I'm kind of getting away from that, but I check in and see, what does my body need today? What does it need on the physical realm? What does it need on the spiritual realm? And what does it need in the emotional? Because I had cut off my emotions right here. I never, Eric, let them get down into my body and, quote, embody emotions. And there's a whole field now that's really concentrating on helping people embody their emotions, whether it's EMDR, whether it's tapping or NET, neuro emotional technique. But you have to get it out of your head. I used to think my way through the emotion. Of course, Nicole, I should be mad at the driver. I'm mad at the driver. I can write that down. I'm mad. But I didn't feel it. I didn't allow my body to really feel it. And so I intellectualize it. And that's a completely different way of processing things. So
when you dialogue with yourself and you dialogue with your soul and you ask it questions, how are you able to discern what's coming from your soul truly versus what's coming, say, from, the intellectualizations going on in your brain, or even just ideas that you're receiving from the outside. How can you discern when it is truly your soul speaking to you?
When the evidence shows that what I had thought and written down comes true.
Okay,
So,
for example.
well, I had an example last week where I had written, "What does my soul want me to know today?" And it told me I was in for a big surprise. And I thought, oh, yay, it's going to be positive. Well, later in the day, I was working at my desk and I looked out my window and there was an 18-wheeler FedEx truck on our little street. Now, we have the FedEx regular direct delivery trucks, not the 18-wheelers, right? So it was a freight truck. And it pulled right in front of our house. And I thought, what did we order? Well, it turns out it was for the neighbor. He was just off one house. So it was this huge box, like maybe it was a hot tub or something, that massive a size. And one of the corners was dented. So the owner was out looking at it, and through all of the packing, what was in it was actually okay. But I thought, wow, what does this mean from an intuitive place in myself? Well, the next day I woke up and I checked my Amazon reviews for my book, and I had received a 1-star and a 4-star with absolutely no commentary to it, no identification with it. It was just the stars. And I was like, what? Somebody gave me a 1-star and didn't even write anything? I mean, who does that? So I was just, and I'm working on this not to take things personally, but it really was kind of like devastating to ruin my little record there with my 5 stars, and I was really having to look at myself and realize that the overall global rating is what you're looking at, but inside my package of the book, it's perfect. There was no damage done to it, and to really understand that you cannot take these ratings personally. You can't, they're not about you, they're about the other person, and you can't control it either. And I think that's what my surprise was I was thinking I was going to get more likes, and then I didn't get that. It was different. So that was kind of using my intuition. When something unusual happens, I kind of pay attention to it. And like I said, we don't get 18-wheelers on this street. So that was that one. And then I also work with my angels and guides, and I have 2 guardian angels, and one's name is Serafina. And 3 weeks ago, my husband and I decided to use our ticket that we had during the pandemic because it was expiring, and we went to Washington, D.C. This is the first time we have flown in 2.5 years. So I'm a bit nervous because I have some health issues, and I wasn't sure what was going on with the mask whole thing being released. And so I was a bit nervous about it. I didn't want to have a migraine or get sick, or, what I was going to see on the planes, or just, the unknown, so to speak. And so Serafina told me, she said, Nicole, you're going to have an amazing trip. She goes, you're going to go have fun. Please don't worry about your health and other things. And I said, so what's the evidence that I'm going to receive to help me know that I've made it, I'm okay, I don't need to worry about it? And she said a rainbow. Okay, so I was like, rainbow. Okay, so we have 2 flights, we do our flights, they go fine. We get to our friend's house that we're staying with. The first night that we're there, they have a bar, and we were getting ready to sit down to dinner, and I looked over at the bar, and on the granite tabletop, the way the light reflected was a rainbow. And I was like, I knew immediately it was Serafina's confirmation. You've made it. You're going to have fun with this group of people, and everything's okay. And it was. I didn't have a migraine. I had a great time. And, it was a fun trip, and we both were good. So the rainbow didn't come in the usual form of, outside after the storm or whatever, but the way the light shone, I just was like, I knew it immediately. And those are the kind of things where you start learning to trust your intuition. It's not made up, and that you're getting that confirmation.
You talk a great deal in the book about how important it is to not, you talk about your sort of career, as it were, as a people pleaser. And I want to, you even describe it as an addiction. So there's a passage in the book where you say, in my case, the behavior of pleasing other people was not in and of itself a negative thing. My strong attachment to it made it problematic. I could not bear to see myself or let others see me in any other way than pleasing and successful. I became so invested in that identity that I now view it as an addiction. Fascinating. So I'm wondering, what is your relationship now with this addiction to people pleasing?
Well, I will tell you, at the end of the day, you feel like a roach that got stomped on. There's no benefit for you. And I have had to work on that one. It comes up time and time again. I have to pull myself back because now I'm aware of it. Before I was not aware of it. And I'm going, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not calling this friend every time. It needs to be a two-way relationship. This relationship is no longer serving me if I'm doing all the work in it, and I'm scared of their anger. And that's usually what people pleasing is about, is you don't want to have that person get mad at you or hurt that person, and I know growing up, it was, you never get angry at your mother, or your father, but you don't ever hurt your mother. And that was very, very driven into us. You do anything she wants. You don't hurt her. She loves you. She's the best mother. And, it was really hard when I, told her that her God that she believes, which is straight out of the Bible. Okay. And my version of what happened on the other side of God are two totally different concepts. And I experienced God as love, period, end of sentence. There was no white man with a beard sitting up there with his tablet judging people. That's all man-made to keep people in fear. I counseled a little 6-year-old last year, and I asked her what she thought of God, because she was in a very fundamental church. And she said, God is like this blue energy and lots of colored balloons. And he doesn't have a head, but he talks. And I just thought, oh my God, how great is that? I hope she'll always keep that, instead of getting formed into a different
So
personalized form.
we haven't actually touched on the experience in your NDE, although you summed it quite beautifully in just that single sentence, that your experience of God as love. Why don't we get into that just briefly, if you would, or not briefly, however much time you want to spend on it. But when the memory came back of your experience in the near-death experience, tell us as much as you'd like to about what your experience was like. And you had repressed this for 19 years, right? You'd completely forgotten it. So when it came back to you, what was your memory?
Well, I was taken to a different plane. I could look down and see my body in the ditch, and I was dead. And I felt no pain, no negativity, no judgment. Any mistakes I ever made, they weren't even an issue. They didn't even come up. I heard other voices. So somehow I wasn't in a human form, but I was still able to hear communication going on between other spirits or beings. And there's two messages to take away. The first is their conversation was very clear to me that we on earth have to ask for their help. Okay. And the reason for that is we have free will. So they're not going to intervene on our behalf unless it's a state of emergency. And in my case, mine was an emergency. So I was going to die if they didn't come in and intervene with me. So we have got to remember that we need to ask the angels for help. Okay, that we are not meant to be doing everything by ourselves here. And it can be little things and it can be big things, but just the act of asking for help with something. Okay. they will help us. They will come through. It may not be like you want it to be. It may come in a different way, but once you request it, they will go to work.
Okay. So before you tell us the second message, it just begs the question. So you said that we need to ask for help in order to receive it from, let's say, the spiritual side, the other side. But then you said that they will only intervene in a like an emergency type situation like yours was. But surely there are so many, for instance, accidents with young people where there is no intervention, the person dies on impact, right? Like this happens we read about it all the time in the newspaper or on the internet to not date myself too bad here with physical newspapers. But so, yeah, how do you reconcile, like, why is it then that in your assessment, like, why do you think that they intervened in your case and then in other cases they don't?
I think sometimes you're given a choice as to whether or not you want to stay or leave. In my case, I wasn't given a choice. I was told that this is the second one, that my mission was to go back to earth and to tell people not to be afraid of death. Because when you're afraid of death, you're not going to truly live.
Can you expound on that? I think that almost, anyone can relate to being afraid of death, no matter what your beliefs are. But what does that mean that you're not able to fully live if you're afraid of death?
Well, if you think about it, most of our fears are irrational. And if you're filled with fear, you're not going to have clarity. And the goal is to get into alignment, to get your body, your soul, your spirit, and your mind in alignment. Okay. And if you have it cut off at different places, and like mine was cut off from my body, mine was cut off at a soul level. I actually had seen a shaman, and I talk about that in the book, where he saw that I had a 30%, like a V cut out of me, where I kept trying to fly out and leave my body. So, for good reason. I didn't want to be here. I had 2 more code blues, where I was pronounced dead. So I have an angel with me. They're called military angels, where they will really fight for you. They knew that I could handle this assignment, but they had to work really hard to just keep me alive, because I really wanted to go back to the other side. I didn't want to have to deal with my family. I went back to a state of infancy at 19 years old. At 20, I couldn't walk. I couldn't urinate on my own. I mean, I had to start from infancy, and I just had, my mother and dad, and it was like I had to do what they said. So to get well, and I appreciate that they were there and they helped me get well, but then they launched me out and I wasn't ready to go, because they hadn't done anything in terms of my mental health or my spiritual, actually. But I think, our society with death has a cloud of depression and negativity around it throughout our culture and society. Most books focus on the doom and gloom of death. And if you think about it, even the upcoming holiday of, Halloween is scary for kids, because you've got coffins and you've got skeletons and you've got Dracula, and, it's not the Day of the Dead where the soul comes back. They're very different interpretations of that with the skeleton and things like that. But it really is, I'm trying to help people understand we need to magic away that doom and gloom and come in with a higher conscious and a expanding consciousness of what death is really about. Now, please don't misunderstand me. There is still suffering. There's still grief and pain and loss, and poignancy that we must be, how do I say this, carefully and compassionately hold and heal for people that have someone that does die. We are human, so we are going to feel that. But the cosmic context is benevolence and extraordinary. So knowing that true context enables us to live a happier life, to prepare for our own graceful passing, and also to support others who approach their own transition.
I wanted to ask you, you talk in the book about spiritual trauma, and I really appreciated the way that you defined that. So tell us what spiritual trauma is as far as you understand it.
Well, trauma, it's abuse, and I think when you're put in a situation where you are told things that are not truths, that you start believing, having a belief system that in terms of spirituality, that this God that that's supposed to be this highest level is dualistic, and that you have rules to follow. And if you're not doing them, then you're a sinner. You're a bad person. You come in with original sin. I haven't seen a baby born yet that looks like they have sinned. It's just like, I could never get that concept. And I think the abuse that has gone on in most churches, especially the pedophilia, and it's not just with the Catholic Church, it is also now the Southern Baptist Church. There's investigations with that, the Mormons. I mean, it's these positions that people get in of power where they have control over others, and their outcome in their life, it's like their destiny is in these people's hands. And that is a wrong message, to think that God is external and you have to do all this work is a fallacy. God is internal. We are all eternal sparks of God. We all are the essence of God. And to think that you're being told you have to do it this way. Every church has, or denomination has, a this way it has to be done, and then this way. And, they all can't be right. And the whole thing is, it's like, that's what I was dealing with the Baptists and the Lutherans. The Lutherans were over here with Martin Luther Catechism, and the Baptists were over here with hellfire and brimstone and revivals. But they had much more fun, I will tell you, the Baptists, because they had bowling alleys and gyms, and they had a minister of recreation in our church over there. So it was a lot funner at the Baptist church, which caused more people to go there, I think.
That's funny.
So spiritual abuse is when, like, my mother told me that I wasn't a Christian. And I said, Mom, how in the world can you say that to me after all these years? She goes, because you don't go to church. And I said, what does that have to do with anything? And then I told her, I said, well, I go to church at the beach because I was living in Hawaii, and the beach to me was church. There's nowhere that God is not, and there's no beginning and there's no end with this. And I'm trying to tell her, I love being in nature. And to me, that I love animals. I love to just see its creation, and the energy of it all. And there's so much more that we don't understand. But for you to judge me, didn't Jesus say, judge not lest you be judged? But the hypocrisy that goes on in most of the denominations is just a complete turnoff to me. And I think more and more people are starting to wake up to that.
Yeah. So
did I define that like I did in the book? I forgot how I defined
well,
it.
you gave a much longer definition, but it's still I appreciated everything you shared. You went deeper than just like a quick definition. But the way that I recall you discussing spiritual trauma succinctly in the book was that this, and you did talk about it in your answer, but basically just separation from God, or this notion that you're separate. And that it's this belief that you're separate, that God is completely outside of you and potentially judging you and condemning you, that's what you were referring to as spiritual trauma. Just basically forgetting that you cannot be separated from God. And it reminds me of back in the 90s, I think it was, those conversations with God the trilogy of books
Neil,
that were
yeah.
published, right? Neil Donald Walsh. And I remember him expressing in those books this concept, and I think it was probably the first time I had encountered it, which was this sense of what you were describing, that God is everything and that God is in everything, and that basically everything that exists is sort of like a piece of God, that God kind of, I'm probably butchering this, but essentially the idea of God basically being shattered into an uncountable number of pieces, and that is essentially the physical world and that we exist in, and that we all are basically part of it, right? And if you want to look at this on from a more, let's say, scientific level, you could look at it more of an atomic level, that we're all made up of the same stuff, right? That the Big Bang happened, and we are all remnants of it. We are all pieces of stars. We are all like, we're made up of those same elements at our core. So it's just an interesting and very, very different from the way that God is presented to many of us growing up, and in our, especially in Western culture, this idea of separation from God and God being completely, separate from you. And so you talk in the book about what, like, the remedy to people pleasing is essentially total and pure self-acceptance and self-love, and that this is where healing comes from, and that when you respect yourself, you're far less likely to succumb to this tendency to want to please other people out of fear of separation from them and fear of their disapproval, right? Which is really an extension of fear of disapproval from God,
Or rejection.
or rejection from God, right?
Yeah.
Or from other, or from people
other people, exactly. Your parents, your family. Yeah. And, I take the 10 common lessons from near-death experiences that was released in 2020 in the International Association of Near-Death Studies, and that I use those 10 lessons as chapters because I want people to focus on the positive, and every single one of them is a collective. I mean, they interviewed thousands of people, and, my own experience, along with hundreds of thousands of others, is that death is absolute beauty, light, and loving kindness on the other side. We do not die. Yes, the physical vessel that's holding our soul and spirit decays, but that essence, that vapor, the breathing, that goes right straight out of us and up. And you're right, love is all that matters, and it's the source of all that exists. That's why you can say God is love. And
all right, so I want to ask you one more question. Just one small little question that I think is a fun one.
Lay it on me, Eric.
A fun one to wrap this up with. So from your point of view, with the life experiences that you've had, and you share them very generously in the book, and I want to again encourage people to check it out. It is a fascinating read. I think that you'll get something out of it, regardless of what your beliefs are presently, and regardless of what your life experience is. I think that there are lots of points of connection to be made in reading Nicole's story. There are a lot of points of identification with, I should say, with her story. Undoubtedly, you will relate to some dynamic somewhere, and it's a very it's a fascinating read, and it'll get you to perhaps look at things a little bit differently. So my last question I want to ask you is, from your point of view, why are we here? Why do you think we are in this human form? Why do we exist? What is the purpose of our lives, which, as you mentioned, are filled with untold amounts of not just these things, but there's plenty of joy and beauty, but there's also like an undeniable amount of pain and suffering and grief and trauma that goes on. And so it just begs the question, why are we here? What do you think?
From my experience,
Yeah.
The reason why we're here is we all come in with a contract that we have agreed to on the other side. And it's a lesson that we need to learn. Our souls are constantly developing. And I would say it's about developing consciousness, which we're not quite at yet, I think, in our society. of being conscious that your behavior is going to affect me. Everyone and everything is connected, you know, and we need to become more aware of that, and we need to implement that. So I think I believe this is not our first rodeo. Our soul incarnates several times until we're able to get the lesson learned. And it takes some people several go rounds, you know, for that to happen. I don't know why that is, but, you know, we need to learn to love ourselves and others and all sentient beings. The way we're treating our earth right now is not very loving, in my opinion. The way we treat animals is not very loving. And I think COVID was, you know, my degree's in public health as well. And the first group that really got affected was the poultry industry workers and the meat packers. If you remember when COVID first came, because SARS is a animal to human transmission. And what we didn't ever do was address that, make it better for the way that we're treating animals. We didn't change any of the procedures with slaughterhouses as a result of this, you know? So I think that's a big red flag that something else is going to come up again until we get that lesson. So learning love, compassion, consciousness, that's what we're on the journey of. And it's taken time here on earth to change this and to shift it. And I think we come in as, some of us are light workers. I think that's what I am. I think it's what you are, you know, and helping to bridge and get people to start thinking about and becoming aware, because if you're doing stuff unconsciously, you're never going to be aware to change it. You've got to deal with that unconscious and work through your own trauma wounds, because if you don't heal them, you will pass them on to the next generation. You will have no compassion for them, and you will have no empathy for them, because nobody had it for you.
Right. And you mentioned in the book, you know, I think your ability to have compassion for your parents was in part, you know, recognizing their deep trauma histories.
Yes.
And the fact that they were not able to transcend them, and that they were essentially, you know, products of those traumas. So there's a lot to unpack in what you said, not the least of which is, you know, and we do this as a society, I think, in many ways. Like if you just look at, for instance, healthcare, we tend to treat the symptoms, right? We tend to try to address, oh, I have a pain, make it go away. And we try to address the symptoms without necessarily getting at the root of them. What is the cause? What is the, you know, what's right? And until we address the cause of whether it's a personal health issue or a societal health issue, then likely we're just going to sort of put a Band-Aid on it, as it were, and the problem will keep recurring because it hasn't been addressed at its core. So Nicole, thank you so much for this lovely conversation. And I think that you've given us a lot to think about, and you know, I commend you on the publication of this book and seeing it through. I can only imagine what it took to write it on a number of different levels. So I appreciate all that you share in it. And it gives us you share very generously and intimately your personal struggles and experiences with, you know, really for the betterment of the reader, and with an intention to spread a message to encourage people to love themselves fully and to heal themselves, and ultimately, right, to not fear death. Well, maybe good luck with that one. That might be a big ask, but at least you've planted a seed.
Yeah, and I've got some data to show that almost everyone that crosses over and comes back all has that same story. And, you know, I will say one more thing about the white light. White absorbs all other colors, right? Okay. And so you hear that phrase, the light of God surrounds you. So when people go through that tunnel or the white light, that's God energy surrounding you.
Yeah.
How soothing is that?
I would say that like every fiber in my being wants to sign up for that, right? And it's but I admit my intellect very much gets in the way of allowing myself to, well, like maybe, right? Like I don't know. I mean,
Yeah,
could be,
yeah.
but I haven't had the experience. However, I'll share this with you before we wrap up, that I worked many years. Well, I did volunteer work for many years in a hospital, and I did encounter someone that I visited in the ICU. This was a number of years ago, and he had flatlined at some point. He was clinically dead. I don't remember for how long it lasted, and he shared with me what his experience was. And I wish I had like taken detailed notes as soon as I had gotten home, but I do remember the general idea, and it was very similar to what you described. He had this sense of leaving his body and experiencing what he basically was describing as, pure bliss.
Yeah.
This incredibly blissful state. And the way he told it to me was that there was not any part of him whatsoever. Like he said he felt he was given a choice as to whether he wanted to return or not. And it was interesting because you had mentioned you didn't feel like you had a say in the matter. You didn't have a choice. There's like, you're going back. But he said he was given a choice, and basically like every ounce of him was like, hell no, do I want to go back? Like, this is the best. Like, why would I want to return? And he told me that the only reason that he chose to return was he had, I think it was a 9-year-old daughter that he felt he could not abandon, he could not leave behind. And that was his reason. This was his story. This was his experience. Who am I to, I mean, why wouldn't I believe what he told me?
Yeah.
Actually, it does. It does bring up a question that I feel like I can ask you if you have the time, which is that, and you address this briefly in the book, which is, in our hyper rationalist and materialist culture, we dismiss even people's experiences. And I know that there are myriad reports from people who have had NDEs, near-death experiences. And as you say, there are some profound similarities among many of these experiences, and they're documented. And, there are things that certainly science cannot explain in terms of how would someone have known this if they hadn't left their body and seen what was happening in the room, in the operating room. Like, how would they possibly have known if they were dead? Right. There's endless like scenarios like this. But there is sort of I guess, a medical theory that all of this is just neurons in the brain firing off chemicals at the moment of death that creates this experience of like, peacefulness, bliss, what have you. What is your response to people who, would dismiss an experience like you had as simply just the firing off of neurons and chemicals in the brain? What do you say to that?
I don't engage with them anymore because I'm not going to get in a debate with you about it. I know what I know. I know my truth. And it's like trying to, I was doing a book sale the other day and I was approached by a group of Gideons. I didn't even know they were still around. And I wanted to ask them how they got the contract for all the hotels to put the Bible in that, but I completely forgot they existed. And, they were the first people that were telling me about Jesus and all this. And I was just, I learned from them, do not engage. It's just like, if you're not interested in the book and my story, please move on,
But do you equate like the scientific skeptics? Do you put them in the same category as, let's say, people who are fervently religious and dismiss your story? Do you put them in the same category of people that
basically
like it's
because they're not suspending disbelief and they're not open to anything other than the physiological part of the way the body is working? And we work in all different realms and on all different levels. Right. And so that is not my, I'm not trying to convince people to change their opinion. I'm trying to present information that you can make an informed choice that is like the lessons from NDEs. Those 10 are substantiated by science that this association did. So, I try to combine some of the science in there and talk about this. This has been going on for a long time that people have had NDEs, and they're very, very similar. And a lot of people just are scared to even put them out there because they think people will think they're crazy or whatever, you know? So I think we're getting beyond that as a society, and more people are realizing how we're all connected in energy, and that, you know, I can't make something like this up. I couldn't on my own free will bring myself back to life. You know, I just didn't have, I was out. So something had to intervene to do that, you know, and so it was from another dimension.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, one of the core ideas here is just listening to people, listening to their experiences, doing your best to keep an open mind, and, you know, just, I think, have the humility to at least say, look, that I don't know, I didn't have that experience, right? And to just say, this is someone else who's presenting. There's so much about human existence that is a mystery. We are really determined. We really have a natural desire to understand everything, and we do our best. And we've made some incredible leaps in that regard, especially due to scientific achievements and discoveries. But there's still so much we don't know and so much we don't understand. I think it's important to at least be able to acknowledge that, and then to entertain, wow, what if, and this is, you know, these are experiences other people have had, and to not be maybe so fervently or religiously, if you will, attached to any one dogma, be it science, materialism, or, you know, religion. And also that science and spirituality do not have to be mutually exclusive, I think.
Exactly. Well
Awesome.
said.
Well, thank you so much, Nicole. I really, again, appreciate everything that you've shared.
Well, thank you so much.
I wish you all the best with the book.
Yeah, thank you very much, and have a wonderful holiday season. And it was just a delight and joy, and I'm really grateful and blessed that we got to have this chat, and I hope it helps others out there, because I really do. That is my mission, is to help people to not be afraid of life and to truly live, because if you're scared of it, you're not going to put yourself out there in ways that you would if you knew, hey, I'm okay no matter what happens.
I love that. It's, if you have a sense of security and trust in, let's say, yourself, in life itself, then you're much more willing to take risks and to fulfill your potential.
Yeah.
So thank you once again. It was really lovely chatting with you, and look forward to connecting again at some point. Take good care.
Thank you.